From the wreck of the Amanda Lockridge, Misha and Dianne are watching Santa Barbara.
Welcome
Hello.
to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara Week 21. We have just watched the 100th episode of Santa Barbara. Well, we watched it last week, but so this is our 100th podcast.
Yay.
So this episode originally aired December 17th, 1984. And we've just been down to the wreck of the Amanda Lockridge to try and get there before Lionel. See what's down there. It's kind of chilly in December. So, but first, Lionel arrives at the hospital and asks Mason why Peter is so frightened of him. And whether Peter has implicated anyone in Channing's murder. So, of course, Mason, doesn't reveal anything to Lionel. Mason tells Peter, after Lionel's gone, that he has to change his story. And Peter says that Mason needs to drop all the charges against him, including the attempted murder against Joe Perkins, and also to give him $50,000 a year for life.
I really love Peter's spirit in all this. And I love the way he and Mason, whatever their circumstances, are always continuing to needle and bargain with each other.
We were talking about Peter Flint.
I love the dynamic between Peter and Mason, and I always have. I love the fact that Peter still has the spirit, despite being in critical condition and hooked up to all these machines, to still be bargaining with Mason and needling Mason. And I love that sort of continuing dynamic with their relationship. That if you look at the entire run of the series so far, it doesn't seem to matter what what stage they're in. They always have this relationship of needling each other and bargaining and undermining each other.
He seems to rally a bit whenever Mason comes into the room.
Does.
And then he can just pretend to pass out whenever things aren't going his way. So do you think, I don't know how Mason can drop the murder charges.
No.
I mean, he'd have to get Joe Perkins to buy in on that somehow, I think. So we'll see if Peter gets what he wants there. $50,000 a year for life. Well, Mason's been disinherited, so that's probably a large
But Peter
chunk of his
doesn't know
salary.
that right now. So that leads possibilities too, actually.
And it's nice that Lionel's worried about Peter.
It is.
I think he heard Peter say that Mason was in the room, so as much as he's worried that Warren might be the killer, he's also now thinking it could be Mason. So now Lionel has a busy episode. So next thing Lionel has to do is zip over to his boat, and we got some nice location footage of Nick Coster on an actual large diving boat, and Elizabeth Peel shows up on a motor launch, and she's suddenly blonde. I'm pretty sure she had brown hair yesterday.
Yeah, I didn't remember, actually. I know she was wearing a very grand-looking hat at one point.
Maybe those are Alexis Carrington-inspired outfits. So she comes to the boat to check on her paintings, which is, of course, the dumbest thing I think she could be doing if she's been counterfeiting these paintings and trying to pretend she doesn't know Lionel Lockridge, and Lionel pretty much says so.
And I have to say, having grown up myself in a little fishing village, people do notice when you go in and out in a boat. I really found Elizabeth's reasoning that no one would see her to be, well, very much wishful thinking, if nothing else. The way they're going in and out of the bay, I'm sure everyone is noticing.
So he ends up telling her that she needs to go back to, she can't hang out on the boat all afternoon. She needs to go back, and then she can, if she really must, she can come out later and meet them when they're diving. So then she takes the opportunity to ask him about Cece Capwell. And Lionel speculates that Gina is interested in Cece, which is interesting that he's noticed that from the little bit. But he wants Elizabeth to wait until this venture is over before starting on the seduction of C.C. Capwell.
Yes.
And then I was thinking, I don't know if I mentioned it last time, that I think Elizabeth's going to try and get C.C. to buy some of the counterfeit paintings. I mean, imagine there'll be an auction or something. Because if Lionel's goal is to make money, not to have a bunch of fake paintings in his house. So, yeah, I bet we'll see that, since she's already talked to C.C. about redoing his collection. So then she can, who knows how many of his collection is fake, since she had authenticated the previous batch.
I think we're seeing a really reckless side of Elizabeth, and I think she's far too overconfident and complacent, and I think we're starting to see how this might unravel for both her and Lionel.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm rooting for the bad guys in this one, because Cece's such a jerk.
Yeah. I'm rooting for them. I just think Elizabeth's going to mess up with her attitude.
Back at the mansion, Gina comes in from playing tennis, and Elizabeth arrives, and Gina knows that she's good at tennis, so she brags about how good she is at the Bel Air Country Club, that she's at the top. Cece asks Elizabeth if she plays tennis, and, or maybe even Gina does, and she says, well, she's played a few times, and so Gina's kind of grinning because she knows she's better than Elizabeth at something. And Elizabeth says that they only got to the quarterfinals at Wimbledon 2 years ago, and were beaten by Martina, and I forget who the other person was. So, Gina's smile rapidly vanishes as she realizes Elizabeth is probably better at tennis than her. So, and then Cece takes the opportunity to ask Elizabeth a bit more about what she thinks will happen with Lionel's dive, and she says basically that the paintings are unlikely to have survived. So Cece says, well, he's always trying to pull golden rabbits out of non-existent hats. Yeah. So I think by that he meant that Lionel will maybe luck out, which is not what Cece wants. So, and then Summer shows up to talk to Gina, and we find out exactly the whole backstory. We find out that Hank Judson used to date Gina, and that it was not a good relationship, and that Gina had dumped him, but that Hank had showed up at Summer's place at some point to try to get her to talk Gina into getting back with them, and that is when he raped her. Yeah. So, which is something that Gina didn't know. So now we know the whole backstory about that. So that's probably what they were talking about all those weeks ago when they said they didn't want to go back to a situation like they had before. Now Amy crumples up the check from Jeff in anger and decides to keep the baby. Jade is quite happy about that. And then when Brick arrives, Amy tells him she's going to keep the baby. And Brick suggests that rather than crumpling up Jeff's check, they should cash it and put it towards the baby, since
which seems very sensible.
Poor, so it seems stupid to throw away $700. Yeah.
And we got a really nice scene between Amy and Jade, which I always like it when Jade shows up. And, they seem to have a really good dynamic, which I like to see.
Well, as I predicted, once Mr. Bottom's story ended, Jade has nothing to do. Danny has nothing to do.
No, we haven't seen Lakin since her night with Ted either.
That's really their only storyline now. So hopefully they just put everything on hold for Christmas, and they'll have a new story for the kids.
I hope so.
In January, because that was, we've had the Hollywood story and then the Mr. Bottom story. So hopefully they've got something.
And the Mr. Bottom story also dovetailed with the whole thing with the hotel as well.
So they've got nothing right now, storyline-wise, other than Ted and Lakin. So hopefully they won't let that,
I'd like to see more of them.
Now, back to Lionel Lockridge. She's got more stuff to do. In addition to Peter and diving for treasure, he also is having flashbacks. And we find out for the first time that Lionel, too, was in the study with Channing that day. So previously we knew Warren was.
Channing had a lot of meetings lined up in that study that day.
I think he was blackmailing, like, a whole list of people. because he was telling Warren he was going to announce something at the press conference, and now in the flashback we find out that he knew, well, we kind of knew this, he knew about Lionel's affair with Sophia, but he also found out from her diary that she was going to meet Lionel on the day she died and break up with him. So he says, so obviously you killed my mother, and I'm going to announce that at the press conference today.
So now we've seen flashbacks with Peter and Channing, and with Warren and Channing, and now with Lionel and Channing. I'm really looking forward to the flashback we see with Mason and Channing, which I'm sure will be coming up in the not-too-distant future.
Yeah.
And I have to say, Channing does not come across as a very nice person in any of these flashbacks.
No, we have, we have a lot of, even some of the people we didn't previously suspect of murdering Channing. Now we think, well, they might have had a good reason to do it.
Yeah.
So, and so this is all happening on the ship. He's having his flashback on this expensive rental boat that the show has rented. Elizabeth arrives after her detour to the Capwell mansion. And she and Lionel flirt while they're getting into their wetsuits. And then we have a nice location shoot of some diving. We see Lionel and Elizabeth jump into the water, and we see some underwater stuff of some chains being attached to a safe, and the safe is being hauled out. And the safe is a lot smaller than I imagined it was going to be. I was imagining one of those big bank vault safes that's like 10 feet tall. But it was only about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall at best. Like a small refrigerator that you might have in your office. So anyway, I think it's clear that the paintings aren't in that safe, which I think has been said. The paintings are supposed to be in the air bubble in the next room. But I think this is the safe that has the book. The logbook, the captain's log. So I suspect that Elizabeth's forgery skills may not just be limited to paintings, and I think they may be forging some pages of the captain's log to make it definitely look like, was it Horatio Capwell? No. Nathaniel Capwell had something to do with the sinking of the Amanda Lockridge.
Yeah, we'll find out.
I mean, maybe they'll find the log already says that. They don't have to forge anything. Just put it back. So they need to open it very carefully. It's covered with barnacles, but just luckily for everyone that they only have to remove one set of barnacles that's blocking the lock, and then the thing swings open very easily for something that's been underwater for 100 years. It's not rusted shut at all. So, and they're very careful not to damage it because they want to seal it up again and make it look like it's been down there for 100 years. So anyway, suspend some disbelief on that. But I mean, it looked pretty good bringing up the safe, and I mean, it's a lot of hassle to get props to sink properly when you want them to, but not to be too heavy when you want to wheel them onto a set. So it's good. They managed to achieve it. So. And so that was it. It ended with them pulling open the safe.
So we'll find out next time, hopefully, what is actually in there.
And during the credits, there was a new credit, underwater consultant Nicholas Coster. So as you know from watching our last episode, where we had our exclusive interview with Nicholas Coster at the end, that he was, he was a diver, and he taught Warren, the actor who played Warren, how to dive, and that he was the captain of that boat. And, underwater consultant Nicholas Coster. And also Ava Lazar was still in the credits. And I can only assume that is somehow related to the way soap opera contracts work, and that she had a contract for X number of months, and that even if she's actually not on screen and has finished all her work, that she needs to still be credited until the end of that contract. Because she definitely hasn't appeared in any episodes between her last credit and this one.
I think we've actually seen that in a couple other cases before this as well, but I can't remember which ones.
Well, in those first 50 episodes, though, we couldn't really be sure that those credits were the real ones, because I think they were the French airing with possibly some just random credits put on the end. That they were on too many. I think they were on every episode, which in the real world wouldn't be. I think they only give the full cast credits once a week at most, and the full crew credits once a week, and then the full everyone credits maybe when they're running short or whatever. So
yeah.
So very excited. We're going to have a week of diving, I think, because even after this week's episode, they'll have to put the safe back. They'll have to get those paintings down.
Yeah.
And then we'll have another day before the real dive that's going to be televised and everything, where they bring up all the stuff they've just hidden. So I think we'll have a week of diving as a lead into Christmas.
Yeah.
So we'll be back after we've watched episode 101 of Santa Barbara.
See ya.
Welcome.
Hello.
To Misha and Dianne watch Santa Barbara episode 101. This is week 21, and the Tuesday episode aired on the 18th of December 1984. Now, Mason tells Cece and Kelly that the charges against Peter have been dropped, which neither of them is too happy about.
No.
Clearly Mason has talked the DA into this, but Mason blames it all on the DA, saying, oh yeah, the DA says that testimony from the hospital is enough. And Kelly said, oh, well, what about Joe's witness testimony? It's just one person, it's just not enough. So, it's interesting, we've not actually seen the DA, so
no.
We don't know. But clearly, Mason has some sway with the DA.
It is interesting to me, though, not only does Mason apparently have some sway with the DA, but it seems like Peter has some sway with Mason. Because every time they have these kind of conversations, Peter actually ends up getting his way. You know, if we remember that $50,000 he managed to get out of Mason for the information about the adoption. So it's interesting because in all of these situations, it would really seem like Mason would have every tool of power at his disposal. And he always seems to have Peter in every other way at a disadvantage. And yet Peter always seems to manage to make a bargain with him.
Now, detouring to the boat, Lionel and Elizabeth have opened the safe, and they found some old mushy money and notes of loans, which is what they expected to find. Then they find some exciting jewelry, both from the value of the emeralds and rubies, but also from the historic significance of them. They find a cross that they think dates from the time of the Crusades. They also find a Chinese puzzle box, which they don't have any luck opening. And at the back of the safe, there's a secret compartment with the captain's log. Now, it's just wrapped in some wax paper, not even sealed. So it seems like they were very lucky. There must have been an air bubble in the back of that safe. I'm a bit worried about when they put it back down there, if it's actually going to get wet, because how are they going to be able to reproduce that, that dry spot in there? But so they don't look at it there because they don't want to damage it. And then it turns out Liz has forgotten her forgery kit at the Capwell mansion. So Lionel drops her off a quarter mile away and says, come back in 10 minutes. So she shows up. First thing she does is drops her purse at the front door, and just as Cruz arrives, so he helps her pick up some things from that. This is the first time they've met, but don't know if he spotted anything incriminating in her bag or not.
We know that Cruz is a lot smarter than quite a few of the other characters on this.
So if there was anything suspicious in her bag, he might be thinking about that in the back of his head, right?
Yeah.
So then she goes in and is immediately roped in by Cece to join the family for a drink. So Lionel's waiting and waiting. He eventually calls with a fake English accent and pretends to be there. He calls Cece and puts on a false English accent. It pretends to be from the museum and that someone has dropped some of Elizabeth's slides, and so this gives her an excuse to run out and meet him. Joe arrives also at the Capwell mansion and gives Cruz an envelope full of cash. Cece asks Cruz about Joe's work, and we find out that Joe and Cruz are in a partnership with some other people to dig water wells in Santa Barbara after the earthquake. And that envelope was full of cash. It was Cruz's first payment. And Cece says he doesn't think that venture is likely to bear much fruit. And Cruz says it sounds like Cece is rooting for Joe to fail, which is very insightful, because he is.
He is.
Kelly and Joe talk about the fact that Peter's been released, and they're both angry. They end up just going to Kelly's room and having a nap, and Kelly dreams about her mother's funeral. So, and of course, her headaches continue, and Cece had told her to see Dr. Michaels tomorrow. Now, Lionel and Elizabeth are back in their special wine cellar, and they are reading the captain's log. And it indicates that Nathaniel Capwell was urging the crew to loot and pillage at every port of call, and they list a bunch of places where the ship docked, and New Guinea, Easter Island, Cape Town, and it talks about a shrine on the border between Tibet and Nepal where there was an emerald, and apparently Nathaniel sneaked in after the rest of the crew had left and stole the emerald. And he tried to attack Amanda Lockridge, and she ended up hiding his emerald on an island somewhere. And next thing you know, Horatio Lockridge was found dead, and the captain suspected foul play, but there was no evidence. Nathaniel Capwell was suspected. So all of these things, really are more, I think, than Lionel could have hoped for against the Capwells. But the last entry, which was the one he'd been kind of building up in the media about, of whether Nathaniel Capwell somehow caused the sinking. The last entry the captain did was the night before, and it simply said that they're going to dock in Santa Barbara the next morning. And then that night the ship hit reefs and sunk. So they decide they need to make some additions to that, and Elizabeth gets out her quill and makes some additions. Then they go to what I think might be the university, or could it be the hospital? Lionel's bribed someone to get an x-ray machine, and they x-ray the Chinese puzzle box. And they're not clear if there's anything in there or not, but they figure it's safe to put it back into the safe and try to get it open at a later date, because there's unlikely to be anything in there that will contradict the new entries they've made in the log. So this is maybe a bit worrisome, because who knows what they wrote? We don't know yet. And who knows what's in that box? So they actually thought that the box might contain the name of the island where the emerald is hidden, because I think that's something they want to go after. But that wasn't mentioned in the log. So they're thinking there is a hidden page somewhere that details the information about the island. So Mason comes to visit Peter in the hospital, wakes him up with great glee, I think, and says, guess what? The DA has dropped the charges. Peter says, well, I'm not just going to take your word for it, but Mason has a document written by the DA that he's not going to be charged.
Yeah.
And then he says, and what about the rest of our agreement? I need $50,000 a year. And Mason says, well, the only way I could work it is if I give you a quarter of everything I will inherit from Cece. And Peter's doing some quick calculations in his head, and that's a lot more than the $50,000 a year. And he says, but what am I going to live on while I'm waiting for Cece to die? He says, oh, well, part of that includes my trust fund, which I get $100,000 a year from. Or, I guess, he gets $400,000 a year from his trust fund, and 25% of that would be $100,000. So Peter is really happy. He says, I'm going to be rich. So, Peter estimates $5 or $6 million. So if that's just 25% of Mason's share, that would be what, $20 million. That means that the Capwell fortune is around $80 million, I guess, which in 1984 was a good fortune to have, I think.
Of course, we know that even if all of that went through, Peter wouldn't get anything because Mason has been disinherited.
Exactly. So I guess as long as he gets Peter to renege on his statement, then he doesn't care if Peter finds out that he's broke. So,
and he evidently doesn't care about Peter going free for Joe Perkins' attempted murder.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
Which is something definitely Kelly wouldn't be too happy about that.
No.
I think Peter will, easily tell Kelly and Joe, oh, well, the only reason I'm free is because I made a deal with Mason, so you should be angry at him.
Yeah.
So, and now he still doesn't have any money. So he still doesn't have any money, and he's still going to be very upset with Mason. So it's not like Mason's gotten him out of his hair, he's just made him angrier.
Yeah.
Now Dominic gathers up some clippings of Channing's murder and shoves them in an envelope, sneaks back into the Lockridge house, was expecting Minx to show up at any moment and pull a gun on her again.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth and Lionel arrive, and so Dominic hides, and while they're getting whatever it is that Lionel came to get, she overhears them mentioning that Liz is a forger, and they're already talking about some of the treasures they found, which officially won't be found till tomorrow. So I think Dominic has some evidence now that she could use against them. I mean, it's not like the treasures are fake. It's just that they're, been looked at a day early. So Lionel unlocks a drawer to get something and doesn't lock it again. And so after they leave, Dominic dumps all the clippings from the envelope into that desk drawer and says, this will put another nail in your coffin or whatever. Makes me wonder why she couldn't bring those clippings with her when she brought the coins.
Yeah, that would have made sense.
She's making so many trips to the Capwell, or to the Lockridge house. So...
Well, I really can see so many ways Lionel's scheme is going to really not work out for him. And I think the biggest liability Lionel has, Elizabeth may be a brilliant forger, but she seems completely incompetent in every other way. She's been racing back and forth to the boat for no reason. And as I said, as someone who grew up on waterfront, you're pretty much more exposed on the water to seeing eyes than anywhere else, and hearing ears as well, because of course voices carry on the water. But everything, she's now dropped her tools twice. So there's that. I don't know, as a fairly antisocial person myself, I've never had any problems getting out of a small gathering of people, so I really don't see why she could not have easily gotten out of her evening soiree with CC.
At one point, we see her regaling them with tales of the royal family.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's not something that's going to wrap up quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
And then in the timely statement, when finally Lionel calls as, pretending to be Reginald Atwater, she says, I'll tell you all about Prince Andrew's peccadillos at a later date.
And, how easy, by the way, would that be to trace? I'm sure anyone who knows anyone at the museum would know whether this guy really worked there or not.
Especially as Cece's on the board.
And we already know it's a tiny museum. I had expected him to be pretending to call from a museum in London or something. But anyway, so it just seems like this is going to go so wrong in so many ways. And
we've got Dominic with evidence.
Plus, and they're just being incompetent, and I think, at how they're maybe not in the technical sides of it, but now they're running around to different institutions to get things x-rayed. Together, yeah. It just seems like a really poorly executed operation already, and they haven't even
hidden the paintings.
Plus, it occurs to me that if one thing is proven to be forged, even if they do bring it all up, I'm still half expecting that when they do their big public reveal of the contents, they'll all be gone somehow. So I'm still expecting that.
Oh, because there is Eden with her dive team.
Yeah.
That would be funny if Eden stole the paintings or something in advance.
But even if it all does come about as Lionel envisions it, if one thing is proved to be a forgery, and it's Elizabeth who is attached to that, then even the authentic things are going to be suspect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Somehow I'm thinking there's a lot of things being piled up that might make this not be the way back to the Lockridge fortune that Lionel was hoping.
No, I think he's making it worse and worse. And I don't really, apart from all that, apart from her complete incompetence, I don't really trust Liz either. We've already seen she's a bit duplicitous, obviously. She's a forger who's pretending to be someone who actually authenticates things. But she seemed to me to be a little bit too excited about the treasures. And, the first thing she does is try on one of the jeweled necklaces, which doesn't seem like a very professional approach either. But, we didn't ever see her take it off. I know she did, but, she just seems to be a little bit too attached to the treasure as well, so I wouldn't necessarily trust her. She is a forger. She could easily forge them and replace the authentic ones with fake ones. Mm-hmm. And Lionel wouldn't necessarily know either. She could double-cross all of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Well, we'll find out what happens next when we watch episode 102 of Santa Barbara.
See ya.
Welcome back.
Hello.
Misha and Dianne have watched episode 102 of Santa Barbara. This originally aired on Wednesday, the 19th of December, 1984. Mm-hmm. And we watched it on Tuesday, December 24th, 2019. Mm-hmm. Now, Kelly has a flashback to visiting her mother's grave with her doll.
Yes.
So we're seeing that doll a lot in Kelly's flashbacks.
Yeah, I think that will end up being a significant piece of Kelly's memory. Mm-hmm. What it has to do with Sophia's death, we don't know yet.
She wakes up and turns on the radio and to hear a newscast about Peter's forthcoming press conference. Now, they used a similar technique on Earthquake Day when they showed a whole bunch of people viewing the newscast, and they do that again today. They show Cece listening to that same radio newscast, then Dominic, then Mason, then finally Peter.
And each of them has a very different reaction to the newscast.
Mm-hmm. So Cece demands an explanation from Mason. What is this press conference about? What is Peter going to say? And Mason plays innocent and says, oh, well, we'll have to trust Peter. He's probably just had a change of heart and wants to come clean. Kelly also phones him to see if he's heard the news, and he fends her off as well. So just show up, at the appointed time.
Out.
He wants to see Kelly and Cece a little earlier than the rest of the press. So. And Eden tells Cece she won't be there because she's keeping tabs on Lionel Lockridge today.
Yeah.
So Mason goes to Peter and wants to run through what he's going to say. Peter says, you'll just have to trust me, buddy.
Yeah, he's got this kind of smirk.
Yeah, so we're thinking, is this still going to somehow double-cross Mason? So Dominic runs into Kelly outside of Peter's room and says to Kelly that Mason didn't kill Channing. They're looking at the wrong person, and Kelly wants to know who the right person is. But,
of course.
Just then, Mason comes out, and so they get distracted. Kelly and Cece go in and try to get Peter to give them a preview of what he's going to say, but he blows them off. He just, repeats over and over, I want to change my life, and I have a lot to make up for. But he's kind of smirking a little when he says he doesn't say anything really.
No.
And then the press gets ushered in. And Dominic is in that group. I didn't notice originally, but later she asks a question.
Yeah, we hear that familiar gravelly voice asking questions. So somehow Dominic has gotten a press pass.
So Peter says he's going to answer questions after the statement, although he does kind of half answer a couple.
Yeah.
But he says his statement is, he tells them he was looking in from outside and that he saw only the shadow of a man with dark hair. And one of the reporters says, if you only saw the shadow, how do you know he had dark hair? And then Peter does this, oh, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to ask questions. Oh, I'm too tired. So kicks them out. So anyway, Mason's pretty happy. It's exonerated him in the eyes of Cece and Kelly.
I mean, Peter does basically give a description of Mason. He says, oh, tall, dark-haired man. But,
that is true. It could also be Lionel.
He doesn't actually name Mason.
Yeah. Pretends to get sleepy, so they leave. And then Cece pretty much says he thinks he's made a deal with Mason.
Yeah, I found it really interesting that Cece and Kelly are not really buying it, and I think that speaks a lot to Cece's relationship with Mason. And I think Kelly is still very convinced that Peter made this statement on what appeared to be his deathbed. And I think she's really feels that was the true statement. And so I think she's suspecting Mason cut a deal as well, especially since suddenly Peter is not in any way in danger of being prosecuted for the attempted murder of Joe Perkins, which I really think could be challenged in a court of law. Yeah,
Kelly and Cece are somewhat happy about that.
Yeah.
So when they're alone, Mason tells Peter the bad news.
Yeah.
I've been disinherited thanks to your previous shenanigans. So you're not getting any money.
Yeah, he says, you took something very precious from me, which is his sort of the prestige of being a Capwell and being part of this family, and of course being a beneficiary of the Capwell fortune. And so he is taking away only the opportunity Peter might have had to have earned this money through the deal. I still think, though, that Peter actually got a pretty good deal out of this bargain because he is free. He is not going to be prosecuted for Joe Perkins' attempted murder.
That is quite a...
Yeah, so he doesn't look very happy, but he actually has won something pretty important, I think.
So I don't know what he's living on, but I don't know. If he got all that money from Ginger, maybe he has a bit of Mason's 50,000 left or something. I'm not sure. I don't know if he gave that all to Ginger. I think he was giving her only 10,000 a day, so he might have a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how this plays out. I'm sure the shenanigans between Peter and Mason are nowhere near over yet, so we'll find out more.
And Peter can find a new job, I think, once he recovers.
Yeah.
Now, Lionel and Elizabeth rewrap the logbook. It's been baked properly to age the ink, and they repack it in the safe. And Lionel's men replace the sunken paintings with forgeries. So they actually say we put the forgeries in exactly the same place as the ones we brought up. So they actually did bring up the original paintings. But there's no comment at all as to what condition they were in.
No.
So they may well actually have some actual valuable paintings.
Yeah, we don't really know. We just saw the few little things they took out of the safe.
And then the men say they're going to go replace the safe now. How much time do we have? And Lana says, we got 45 minutes before the press arrive. So once again, this is the last minute thing. I don't know why he couldn't have just called the press conference for the next day and given himself 2 days to do the shenanigans.
Well, and when you think about it, too, 45 minutes, I mean, is not long. I used to do a bit of work on setting up events and that. And, you would be setting up cameras and getting camera angles and handing out your press releases and so on during that time, the press would probably already be assembling there in 45 minutes.
So
potentially.
no one's going to notice this unauthorized dive happening just before the real one.
Yeah.
At the museum, Cece tries to get Paul. I don't know if we've seen Paul before at the museum.
No, I didn't recognize him.
And I forget what job he said Paul had at the museum. Was he a curator? But Cece tells Paul he should cancel that Lionel Lockridge press conference.
Yeah.
And Paul's like, well, he's going to have all these artworks. And then Warren is there, and he reminds them that Lionel's going to be donating any paintings he finds. So Cece says, oh, Paul, when you were at the Met, you were one of only six curators. So anyway, after he leaves, Paul makes plans to update his resume.
Yeah. So Warren was there because he's still trying to find Summer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he had hoped that Paul or one of the other people associated with the museum might be able to give him some forwarding information.
Because Paul says Summer has quit her job.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't know where she is, so he suggests talking to Gina.
Yeah.
But Warren reveals he's actually already talked to her, and she doesn't know where Summer is either.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a mystery. But it was really nice. I was trying to think if we'd really seen a scene between Cece and Warren before. And it was really nice to see Warren stand up for his dad. And, he really takes on Cece. He kind of grabs him by the lapels at one point. So it also, though, underlines sort of how risky the strategy that Lionel and Elizabeth are employing is. Because, as we were saying the last episode, that, when Lionel pretends to be someone working at the museum, it's such a small museum, everyone would have known if that person really worked there or not. And Elizabeth is really playing with fire as well, I think, just because it is such a small museum.
Lionel holds his press conference on the ship. And Eden starts heckling about Amanda Lockridge.
Yeah.
She's amongst the group of press. She goes, oh, wasn't Amanda Lockridge insane? And he says, oh, that was something the Capwells railroaded her into. And I'm sure this logbook is going to back up all the stories she told me when she was when I was younger. And he finally says, oh, by the way, ladies and gentlemen of the press, this is Eden Capwell, who's trying to defend her family here. He also says only one member of the press can be on the boat during the dive for liability reasons. So he leaves them to decide who it'll be, and it looks like they picked someone. There was a guy with a camera there later. The press head off, and Eden stays behind and says to Lionel that she's going to dive with him. And he says, absolutely not. And she says, well, I'm certified. He says, no, you're not. And anyway, I'm in charge, and you're not diving.
Yeah.
So then she offers him anything he wants to let her dive.
Yeah.
And he doesn't take her at all seriously. And, he laughs at her transparent attempt. And he ends up, on the spur of the moment, inviting Warren to dive along with him.
Which was really nice. Warren just looks so happy to be part of it.
We know Lionel has been saying no this whole time because he didn't want Warren knowing about the nefarious things he and Elizabeth were working on. And now that everything's safe, of course Warren can dive. So Eden says he just wants to bring up the law. He actually says to Eden, you actually secretly want me to bring up this logbook because you love to see men fighting. So Lionel and Warren do their dive and bring up the safe.
Yep.
And as we know from our Nick Coster interview from last week, that he actually taught John L. Nelson how to dive for these scenes.
Yep.
So that's really cool. If you haven't already listened to it, go ahead and listen to it in our week 20 episode. It's attached at the end of the episode.
And we do have some great diving footage in this episode too.
Yeah. There is some diving. We see that safe being brought up, this time by Lionel and Warren. So we see it being brought up to the surface, and Eden's looking down off the ship, not too happy, and there's a photographer photographing and another crew member, I guess, operating the winch that's pulling up the safe. So we were going to try and get a diving expert to talk about that. Did not work out for this episode, but we'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
And we are probably going to go right ahead and watch episode 103 now.
Yeah.
And podcast later on tonight or tomorrow.
Yeah.
So we'll see you in a few seconds.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Welcome to our second Ask the Expert segment. We interviewed my brother about wreck diving. When asked if he'd like to be on camera, he said, "I wouldn't want to be associated with anything like that." So his responses will be related to us by Sir Reginald Atwater. Welcome, Sir Reginald. It's an honor to be associated with anything like this. Can I ask you a couple of things about wreck diving? You can. So, on the show, they have a fairly large ship, but we only ever saw 3 people on the boat. When they went to bring up the safe on the ship, they had just 2 divers and 1 guy on board with the winch. Is that a big enough crew for wreck diving, or are there other roles? It depends how deep you're going. If you're only going 50 feet, then it's no big deal. 100 feet and you're pushing it. Didn't you tell me once that for wreck diving you use a rope for guiding? When you penetrate a wreck, you're supposed to, yes. Where does the rope get anchored? Does it go all the way back to the ship? No, you tie it just outside the door you went in, or the opening you went in, so you know that's your way out. It's usually on a reel, so you're supposed to reel it in and out. Caves are the same way. You have to tie it. So, okay, that makes sense. So, obviously, they didn't have a real wreck to film on. They only ever filmed people going in or diving down. But the thing is, that safe would be securely anchored to the ship. It wouldn't simply be sitting there. It would be bolted or welded to the deck, so it wouldn't move as the shift is going back and forth. You wouldn't want a 4,000-pound safe sliding around. But on a 100-year-old ship, would it have been a wooden ship? Well, it still would have been secured. But wouldn't the wood be easier to break after 100 years? Depending on the temperature of the water. There are ships out there that have been down there over 100 years, that the wood is just as firm as it was. You've got to remember, that's all oak, that's all hard wood, it's not cheap poplar or pine. It's real wood, teak, oak, all heavy hard woods, and would have been built in. It wouldn't have just been sitting there. It would have been built into one of the walls of the ship or into the floor. Usually they built them into the floor because it was easier to secure them. And in this thing, when they brought it up, it was covered in barnacles, which would be, if it's steel, it would be. The barnacles will attach to it. And then they managed to open it quite easily once they broke off the lock. They just pulled the door open. We figured it would have been rusted shut. Yes, it should be. And then, after they added some fake entries to the captain's log, they closed it again and brought it back down. I don't know if it would be easy to close after you pried it open. Definitely not. The hinges should have been rusted shut. They would have had to soak it. So technically it should have come out of the water into a big salt tank and sat in a tank for weeks, and then slowly the water switched out to bring the salt content down, to decontaminate the tank. The other thing was, there seemed to be a wooden back panel in the safe, and there was a book in there, wrapped in just some wax paper. Well, that's how they used to do it, but it didn't get wet at all. Well, the wax paper would seal it, but... So, when you're operating a winch like that, can one person just on the deck operate it? Most certainly. And it's safe enough for 2 divers to do a wreck dive? Yes, as long as there are 2 of them. You wouldn't be able to tie a rope around it. You'd have to put it in a basket and bring it up. The odds of you being able to tie a rope around it... Actually, they had a rope around it. Because all the barnacles around it and everything would have just been a slick surface, so they would have had to tie it both ways, which means you would need a lot of rope, because you have to make sure it doesn't slide this way. If they only put 1 loop around it, there's no way it's coming up, because the water and the slip knot will not cause it to slide. We can look at the film. They just slung it. That's a conventional sling, like, the guys are trying to balance it. Oh, they've got 2 straps on. That would work. That's safe. Wouldn't just be... They mentioned that it took them 2 hours to get all the stuff off there. So these are 2 divers going up and down multiple times over 2 hours. So I guess they would have been breathing nitrox? It doesn't matter. They shouldn't do that.
even with nitrox? Is it because you can still get nitrogen bubbles?
We'd have to find out how deep the wreck is, because nitrox only works to a certain depth. It's called bounce diving otherwise, and usually it's friggin' hard on your body. It's very dangerous.
Lionel mentioned 20 fathoms to Elizabeth, but that might have just been a joke.
1 fathom is 6 feet. 20 fathoms is 120 feet. That's extremely deep for bounce diving. So you couldn't nitrox dive to that depth, because as you nitrox dive, the oxygen percentage is higher in the mix. Pure oxygen at 4 feet would kill you. So the higher oxygen content limits how deep you can go, because it multiplies.
As you come back up?
Well, no, as you're going down, because you're breathing a bigger concentration every 33 feet.
So it's nitrogen and oxygen mixed?
Yes, but instead of 21% oxygen, you're either at 32 or 36.
So that's good for lower depths?
It's for extended time, because you don't build up as much nitrogen.
So you wouldn't go any lower?
You couldn't go deeper. You can dive shallower for longer.
So what's your maximum depth then?
For 32%, it's 112 feet. For 36%, it's 95 feet.
What do you do below that? A diving bell?
No, you don't nitrox dive. You start going into trimix. You can still dive regular air at 120 feet. You can still dive regular air at up to 180 feet. It's just time. The time really becomes really short. And once you go below 180, you start to use trimix.
And what's that got in it? Nitrogen, oxygen, and helium?
Nitrogen, oxygen, and helium.
And what does the helium do?
It's the filler.
So that you have less nitrogen?
Yes.
Why don't you just do helium oxygen? Then forget about the nitrogen. Then you wouldn't be breathing any nitrogen at all.
Because the helium will affect you too at some point.
Freon isn't hurt. We saw a documentary about the guy who invented Freon. When he testified in front of Congress to show how safe it was, he took a giant lungful to show them that it was safe to breathe.
Entry-level trimix is good for 197 feet. Advanced is 328.
So they're probably just on the verge. Would you be able to tell the difference just from the tanks?
Oh, certainly. Your tanks have to be very distinctive. When you do certified deep diving like that, when you start trimix diving, you've got 2 tanks on your back, which is your deep tank, which has got a certain color reg on it. You have side tanks, which are stage tanks, which have certain mixes in them. If you breathe the wrong mix at the wrong depth, you're dead.
So you breathe one until you get to a certain level, and then you switch tanks.
Yes.
You can probably see from the footage what kind of tanks they have. They've got 1 tank each. Looks like they only have 1. Maybe 20 fathoms is just at the bottom of that 120 feet you mentioned.
Nitrox has to be labeled as nitrox.
Let's look at the film again.
Old masks.
This was filmed in 1984.
They don't show the regs.
So at 120 feet, you would have maximum 13 minutes. And then you'd be okay. And then you'd be in for the day.
That would push you right to the black, which means 2 hours and 4 minutes would get you back to a D. So you'd have 13 minutes. If you took a 15-minute break, you'd end up with like 3 minutes until the next time you dive. And then you'd be done for a day. You couldn't dive more than that. You'd need 5 hours and 5 minutes in between dives to get back to 0.
So if they stayed down the whole 2 hours,
they'd be dead, because maximum bottom time at 120 feet is 13 minutes. Unless you start doing dual tank, extended range. But then you'd have to start getting into decompression stops. You'd probably have to spend 3 hours decompressing. They couldn't swim right up.
well, then we have to assume that although we ever only saw 2 guys, there had to have been a whole crew, and they were switching out, and the 2 guys were coordinating it with them.
That would have been the only way.
All right. Thanks, Renee. Welcome!
Hello.
Welcome to episode 103 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. Last night we watched episode 103, originally aired December 20th, 1984, a Thursday episode. And
we see a reprise of Mason having told Peter that he has nothing to inherit from Cece because he was disinherited. Peter calls Mason scum, and then he asks for an outbound line. He says, "Oh, I got to change my statement." Mason says, "That really only works once."
Yeah.
And Peter says, "Well, this paper is proof." And he says, "Well, no, it's just, an assistant district attorney trick to get you to confess. There's nothing untoward about that paper." So he says, "I can see the headlines now. Capwell outcons con." So Peter says that Mason's a lot worse than him, that he's sold the public trust down the river more than once. And Peter says Mason never should have let him live. He has a nasty habit of getting even.
And I bet he will.
We have something to look forward to there.
Yeah.
Once Peter gets out of the hospital.
And I when I watched this exchange, I thought that Peter wasn't necessarily wrong about having this document, because although it might be considered just one of many tricks to get someone to confess or to give information, it's still not necessarily a good look for Mason, especially since it involves his personal family inheritance.
Now back at the house, Ted is slowly typing his term report, and Kelly comes in and offers to type it for him. Cece comes in, and he's annoyed that she had to work all day. I'm not sure how he figured that out. Eden shows up dressed for the museum event, and she urges Cece to watch it on TV, because she's pretty sure Lionel will fail, or at least he should keep tabs on what's happening to the Capwell name. Cece refuses. Warren shows up to talk to Gina again. Says that, "I don't believe you when you say you didn't know where Summer is. I've asked around. You must know." And she says, "Well, she might be in LA, but I can't tell you why she left."
Yeah.
So he says she says if Summer contacts her, she'll let him know if Summer okays it, but otherwise she won't. Cece and Kelly finally get a chance to talk about why Peter changed his mind. And Kelly goes to the attic to find her old doll that we've seen in all the flashbacks, the giant doll.
Yeah.
And then later, when she and Cece talk, when she has the doll, she says that her headache is gone. So that's kind of interesting. That once she got the doll, her headache is gone. I don't know if she's just saying that because she doesn't want to go see Dr. Michaels. So her headache is gone. Lionel and Augusta are getting all dressed up for the museum. And then Lionel mentions that the Capwell who will be attending will be Eden.
So Augusta's not very happy about that.
Then we hear Augusta yelling when she finds out Minx is not coming. And then they come downstairs, and Lakin is also declining to come. She's still upset by the whole thing related to the feud. Now Dominic arrives at the museum, tries to get in as a member of the press, but doesn't have a press pass, so is sent away by a guard. Then later, somehow, she's managed to get back in, because she's got a camera on her shoulder, and maybe that was enough. Maybe she followed someone else in with that camera.
So Sophia has a lot of mad hidden skills. Not only is she a pilot, which we, apparently had never heard of before she became Dominic, but she also is a photographer.
But one of the other reporters noticed later that her camera wasn't actually turned on.
Yeah.
So there's this giant event, and the press is there interviewing people. We see them interview various people. And we see them interview Elizabeth, and they talk about the fact that Van Gogh was just starting out around that time. Is it possible that some of his paintings are on board? And she said that's very unlikely. I think there would have only been one painting made by this time.
Yeah.
And I just saw it 2 weeks ago. So the mayor is there. I don't wonder if that was the real mayor of Santa Barbara. I guess we could look that up. And then the press asks about Minx. I forget why they say she's not there. But
I think Lionel says that she's having a private soiree at their house.
Ah, okay. And then later, Lakin tells Ted, "Oh, Minx went out for dinner." So, and then when they ask about Lakin, Augusta lies and says she has a bad cold. So Ted, of course, is watching this at the Capwell house and says, "Aha! I told you guys Lakin wasn't going to show up there." And so he goes over there, and so they can exchange presents. And he gives her a locket containing a gem that belonged to Sophia, that Cece gave him on his 12th birthday. And Lakin gives him a watch that belonged to her grandfather that Minx helped pick out of his jewelry box for her.
Yeah, so very, very nice, meaningful gifts.
Yeah, it's nice that Minx is on board, even though we didn't see her in this episode.
No.
Now Dominic calls Mason, pretending to be the wife of a fired Lockridge gardener. And says, I think she puts on a bit of an accent, says she knows that there are gold coins hidden in that house that were stolen from the Capwells. So Mason immediately thinks Sophia's coins.
Yeah.
So he shows up with a warrant, only Ted and Lakin are there, and they search the house and find the gold coins in Lionel's briefcase, interestingly, because that's not where we saw Dominic hide them.
That was where Dominic
So
hid them.
maybe Lionel found them and said, "Oh, I should move these to my briefcase," and in typical Lockridge style. Or maybe
Dominic
broke
stashed them
in
somewhere
again
else.
during another break-in that we didn't see, that Minx didn't catch him.
And I thought it was interesting that Mason jumped on this because he and Cece are not getting along and he's being disinherited. But he still jumps on this, and I'm wondering if he's hoping this will redeem himself in the eyes of the family. Or if maybe finding the real killer or the real thief that might be the killer will help take some of the heat off of the situation with Peter. I thought it was interesting that Mason would jump on this so quickly. I mean, not unexpected, but I think there could have been a lot of motivations.
Yeah, I mean, it's not clear if Mason thinks it's related to the killing, because Dominic definitely didn't say that. So.
Or if he's just trying to take the wind out of the sails of the Lockridges, because he and Lionel have clashed. Now, most recently over Lionel trying to take Peter out of the hospital. So it's another possible motive.
Maybe he feels as a Capwell it's his duty to try and do something to the Lockridges whenever he can. But he tells Lakin it's nothing personal, that the DA issued this warrant and he's just got to follow it. So then when they find the coin, Lakin tries to bargain with Mason. So he's saying, "Oh, how much could those be worth? We'll pay you, and why don't we just forget the legal part of it and just take the coins back?" And probably kind of wheeling dealing that happens all the time in wealthy families. But of course Mason, even with the other police not in earshot, he says he can't do that. So,
well, I could see where this could maybe be a bit foreboding for Lakin's relationship with Ted, because at one point she asks, "Did you know anything about this?" And of course Ted knows all about those coins, and so that could blow up in his face, or it could definitely have implications for his relationship with Lakin. If it becomes known that he had the coins, she might even suspect him of stowing them away in the house.
So back at the museum, various people are making speeches. There's some guy who's kind of an MC. Don't really know what he was. I don't know if we've seen him before. And then Augusta runs into Eden at the Shrimp and says that if she were a Capwell, she'd be getting out of there in the next 5 minutes before Lionel starts speaking. Then Eden runs into Lionel and asks how it feels to be a real-life flash in the pan. And then she said she stopped counting at 20 insults during Lionel's speech. And then it's time to unveil the safe. So this whole episode, we've been going back and forth between the museum and the Lockridge house. I was getting kind of worried that Mason would come and arrest Lionel before
Yeah.
they could even unveil the stuff. So,
Of course, we know that all of this will really implicate Warren, probably more than Lionel.
yeah, that's interesting. Does the evidence actually point to Warren? Well, I guess if they do find the tuxedo jacket, we've only seen them find the gold coins. But if they keep searching, I don't know. Would they stop and arrest Lionel first and then keep searching, or I'm just trying to see how far Lionel will get into his evening before the police show up.
And plus, there's all the clippings.
The clippings and the tuxedo jacket, I think it was. So, yeah, hopefully Lionel gets time to unveil the safes that they're planned.
Yeah.
Can go ahead, even if he ends up. I don't know if they'd put you in jail for gold coins you stole 20 years ago, but definitely the ending of that event is going to be messed up a bit.
Yeah.
So, well, all I can find out about the mayor of Santa Barbara is that from 1981 to 93, it was someone named Sheila Lodge. So, I guess we could do further research to find out if that was actually her playing herself on the show.
Yeah.
So, and Lakin had a new hairdo today.
Yeah, her hair's gotten a little bit bigger, and her makeup's getting a little more 80s.
And she wasn't wearing an outfit quite similar to her usual pastel dress stuff. She was wearing pants and a shirt, so they may have decided to revamp her wardrobe. I did read somewhere just yesterday that apparently they revamp lead characters' wardrobes every 6 months on soap operas. So, all right, that's it for the Thursday episode. So we'll be back to wrap up the week after we've watched episode 104 of Santa Barbara.
Bye.
Bye. Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished watching episode 104 of Santa Barbara. Originally aired Friday, the 21st of December, 1984. So this is the last episode of the 21st week. We've only got one more full week of Santa Barbara in the year 1984. Now, this is a continuation of yesterday's episode, where the museum festivities are being broadcast to the citizens of Santa Barbara. And I was thinking that Mason would be walking in pretty quickly and arresting Lionel, but they somehow managed to stretch it out till the end of the episode. So I was pretty happy that Lionel got to do all of his fun things.
He got his moment in the sun.
So having found the gold coins, Mason's team subsequently finds the clippings by breaking into Lionel's drawer. Mason takes the time to pop over to the Capwell mansion, and Cece keeps trying to kick him out, but Brandon invites him in, and he says, "Oh, Dad, you should keep watching. It's going to get really good." So Cece keeps saying he doesn't want to watch this travesty. Ted and Lakin, meanwhile, go to the museum to try and warn Lionel of what Mason's found. Augusta doesn't want Lakin on camera because she's not dressed properly, and Lionel spots her and pulls her on and says, "Oh, there's my daughter. She had such a bad cold a few hours ago, but it looks like she's doing better." And they finally managed to tell Augusta and then Lionel that Mason found some gold coins and clippings in the house. And he says, "Well, I don't know anything about those. Obviously, it was a setup." And Warren says something about, "Oh, I thought you got rid of those coins." So now Lakin suddenly hears, "What? There is something to do with coins?" She had not known before that Lionel and Augusta and Warren really actually were hiding all this coin stuff from her. She actually then starts arguing with Ted about the fact that he knew all about that.
Yeah.
And she says he's just as bad as Mason. So Lionel starts prying open crates, and the first thing he brings out is a Rembrandt, which Elizabeth authenticates. At this point, Cece decides to head to the museum because he's seeing all this stuff happening on TV. When Mason gets to the museum, he spots a Van Dyke that's been uncrated, and he tells his men to wait until the right moment to arrest Lionel. So Augusta and Warren try to get Lionel to leave because all these police officers have started showing up, but he refuses, so Warren just leaves. Warren ends up going to the Capwell house to try to talk to Gina a little more about Summer. And Gina basically tells Warren what happened with Hank. And Warren wants to know who this guy is. It's clear he wants to go after him in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And Gina says that he hasn't been seen in years. So that makes me think he might be
showing up soon.
At some point soon. Yes. Now, maybe Lionel is starting to get a bit antsy with all the police. He decides to skip ahead to the safe. So they still have a lot of artworks on crate, but he skips ahead, and they do spend a long time chiseling away at things. I think Warren is actually still there at that point, because he and Warren were chiseling away at it. They bring out all the treasures from the front of the safe, and then he goes, "Oh, wait a minute, no captain's log." But I do recall that the Wexlers in 1884 had a hidden compartment. Mm-hmm. So he quickly finds the logbook, which looks much better wrapped than we saw the first time, I think. And he says, "Well, this will tell us a lot about the voyage, but just for tonight, I'm going to skip ahead to the ending."
Mm-hmm.
And he reads all the fake log entries from the last 2 nights of the Amanda Lockridge, and the captain saying things like Nathaniel Capwell's gone nuts, and he's threatening people, and Amanda wants him locked away, and that he's threatened to destroy everyone, and then the ship crashes. So they've made it look like Nathaniel probably caused the crash, which perhaps he did in real life. We just don't have evidence. Cece, who's arrived, starts shouting, "These are lies! These are all fabrications." And then Mason arrests Lionel. So Mason has actually waited until the negative
the worst
stuff about
moment possible.
And Cece is saying, "Why aren't you arresting them?"
Yeah.
Before he says anything about our family, he goes, "Our family? I'm not in this family.
Yeah,
I'm just a bystander. I'm wondering what's going to happen."
Mm-hmm.
So that now explains why Mason has waited this whole time, and satisfactorily. It's a way to get him both win points with CC and get a dig in at him at the same time.
Yeah.
So earlier at the house, he had said to CC, "Oh, have you told Brandon yet about his inheritance?" Or Gina? And he says, "No, don't you tell them?" And he says, "Oh, that'll make it all, that won't make it as hard on them when you change your mind and reinstate me."
Yeah.
So he really thinks this is going to reinstate him as an heir to CC.
I was trying to remember what the original log for the Amanda Lockridge said. It would be kind of neat to see the two of them, the text of the two of them side by side, to see just what Lionel did change in that text.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like they have replaced the last couple of days worth, as well as adding something for that night.
Yeah.
I think they actually replaced a couple of the pages.
Yeah.
But I mean, there was plenty of bad stuff from the island.
There was plenty already in there.
So it'll be interesting to see what, if this gets published in the Santa Barbara Herald or whatever the paper is, and people will be reading this for weeks to come, the entries in the log. It's now all come a bit clear to me now that the way they've done it, with Lionel getting arrested, I assume he's wearing Warren's jacket.
I think so.
So they'll find a note, presumably add another charge to Lionel of killing Channing, and both Augusta and Lionel will think Warren did it and not say anything. And so Lionel might actually take the fall, thinking he's protecting Warren. So that's not what I'm thinking is going to happen. So we were trying to figure out the logistics of that jacket. And how that was going to end up working against Warren. But now I think it may actually end up working against Lionel, which I think Dominic was in this whole episode constantly, quote-unquote, filming people, and she was filming that private conversation with Augusta, Lionel, and Warren, was it? Or was it Ted, Lakin, and Cece? Anyway.
She certainly looked delighted at the end to see Lionel arrested. I find that kind of interesting, and maybe it speaks to her frame of mind as well, because, of course, as you say, she has been observing this entire evening. And so I would think, along with the downfall at this point of Lionel Lockridge, she's also observed, the negative fallout it's had for Tad and Edith's misgivings about the whole thing as well. So I just think that's kind of interesting that she's so delighted to see Lionel go down, but doesn't seem quite as moved or interested in the negative effects this might have on the rest of the family.
Yeah, that's a good point. Elizabeth, immediately jumps in, the moment she pretends to authenticate that Rembrandt. She's like super gung-ho about all these treasures. And done a 180, and she set it up well to be a non-believer up until that first Rembrandt came out.
Yeah, she's played it well.
Yeah, I don't think she had any lines with Cece, but she did run into Warren in an interesting way, and it's like, I think she's interested in Warren, actually. And she made a point of running into him as he was trying to run out to go
to
Gina. And, she was, even from their first meeting where she had to pretend she hated Lionel, I think she knowing that in a couple of weeks, things would be settled down, that she could maybe make a play for Warren. So I think that might be something that's intended.
Yeah.
Anything else from this episode that I may have glossed over?
No, I think you covered everything. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out for Mason, whether he does get readmitted back into the Capwell fold, or if he still finds himself outside of it. It's interesting that, I think I said at the time that Cece was not willing to take Peter's kind of retraction at all. So it kind of speaks to the underlying mistrust that he seems to have for Mason.
Mm-hmm.
If you compare that to the lengths that Augusta and Lionel have gone to for Warren, it's quite striking how different Cece sees his relationship with his oldest son.
Yeah, that's a good contrast. This episode, I think, was probably very complex to write. As I was summarizing it, I thought it would be hard, but it actually was easy to pull everything apart. The main action was at the museum, and then we had Tad go to the Lockridges, then the museum. We had Mason go to the Lockridges, and then Capwell's, and the museum. Cece went to the museum, and it actually all synced up pretty easy to summarize. But there were entire segments between commercial breaks entirely in the museum of them opening up crates and unfolding, waxed paper and things. So it was probably a technically more difficult episode than usual.
I would think
with all
so.
the props and things. And
all the extras.
Yeah, every time they brought something out, they'd say, oh, we have an expert on ink and things here, and they'd hand it to another, I guess, museum board member or whatever. There were several guys in tuxedos with balding hair or mustaches that were experts in various fields. So, in addition to Elizabeth.
And I have to say, I guess the only other observation I would make is I'm not quite sure what Cece was hoping to accomplish by rushing down there. If he wanted to deflate interest in the event, suddenly showing up in the middle of it was not going to do that. It just gives Lionel more publicity.
I mean, Cece calling them fake is probably going to make the headlines, and then someone will just have to come along and say, no, this is authentic. So,
yeah, and of course with Mason arresting him at the sort of peak of the ceremonies, that kind of just makes the Capwells look worse. So.
Yeah. So the week of Christmas is going to be probably a bad one for the Lockridges.
I think so.
Capwells probably won't be able to keep their nose out of things either, as it relates to Channing and the gold coins. Finally, those gold coins are going to be in lockup somewhere and not go floating around the city anymore.
Yeah.
And the clippings, I mean, it's all kind of circumstantial, right? I mean, it's less of a case than than they had against Peter, really. Because, anonymous phone call says all these things are in the house, and then, oh yeah, there they are.
Somehow that has more weight than poor old Joe Perkins actually getting taken hostage and shot at. Kelly witnessing it.
So, I don't know if he'll be able to get bail, as he's had a history of running off to Bora Bora, and now there's a murder charge, but we'll see what happens.
We'll see.
Yeah, and this will be the final week of 1984, week 22, and then we'll have only one episode in the following week, the December 31st episode, before we start 1985.
Well,
so we'll see how they wrap up this first year in Santa Barbara when we return for episode 105.
Bye.
Bye.